Welcome and thank you very much for checking out my review of The Call of the Wild, directed by Chris Sanders, starring Harrison Ford, and the first film to be released under the banner of 20th Century Studios. But do not worry, the fanfare is alive and intact. Tells the story of Buck, a dog who, after being taken away from his home in California, is taken into the wilds of Yukon, Alaska, and made into a sled dog. I was interested in this film because I enjoyed the trailer that came out a while back, and I always love a good dog film, a good adventure film. This was, however, being directed by Chris Sanders. On one hand, because of that, I was excited because he directed 3 films that I adore: Lilo and Stitch, the first How to Train Your Dragon, The Croods, but those are all animated films. This would be his first live action film. So because of that, I was afraid, I was fearful. But being that he's mostly an animation director, it also explains the decision of having the dog being CGI. Not only is he supposedly a big dog, even for the breed, things that you see Buck the dog do in this film are very difficult to do with a real life dog. Not that they are impossible, not that dogs wouldn't do that. There are moments where he's running around indoors and he's going against walls, shaking everything, shaking the ground, shaking tables, almost throwing vases to the floor, almost breaking them, so it would be very difficult. In the end, I was actually glad that they went with a CGI dog. They made it enough that the dog could emote. The eyes are kind of weird, they are kind of too much, but I was so immersed in the story because it is so well told for what it is. Buck is actually the main character of the film. It's the dog that we follow in this story. It's his arc. So it's Sanders' experience with Toothless, with Stitch and whatnot. He is more than accustomed to making us care for these animals, these pets, and following along in their story, and it works really well. Buck is a great character. I fell in love with Buck, and he does look in the film much better than he did in the trailers. The compositing is finished, the design is great. When he's got wet hair and whatnot, his reactions, his body language, his movements, they are all fluid, they all make sense, they all look like a real dog, and they also were very careful not to put Buck near real life dogs. There are shots, wide shots, there he is surrounded by real dogs, but whenever you get into a medium shot or a close-up, they make sure they recreate those dogs in CGI. Now, I could very well be wrong about the wide shots that the other dogs are real dogs, but that just goes to show that the CGI is actually impressive. And not only on the dogs, but on the environments, the wilderness, the landscapes, they all look beautiful. This film has some great cinematography. Everything looks lush and vibrant, full of color, or even devoid of it when the film needs it for the story. And the score is also magnificent. I loved this score. To no surprise, it was composed by John Powell, who composed Solo: A Star Wars Story, or more famously, the 3 How to Train Your Dragon movies. I love those scores, and this one is no different, and of course, he's accustomed to working with Chris Sanders. Now, as I previously mentioned, Buck is our main character. We follow this dog's story, and it's great. I love this character, fell in love with him. I love this story. It's filled with adventure, emotion, it's heartwarming, it's full of wonder, and I forgot that he was CGI, and I immersed into his story because it is well told through Sanders' great direction. Now, since he is the main character, don't go into this film wanting to watch it for Harrison Ford. He is really good in the film, but he doesn't really come into the film about 1 hour in. And I really like the chemistry that they have with each other, what they give to each other in this story, about what this story is telling thematically. But the film is not without its issues. I am gushing about this film because I loved a lot of things about it, but I don't think it's quite a great film. There is an overbearing and unnecessary narration that is even illogical. Like, the narration doesn't make sense at all. Harrison Ford is narrating this film, and he comes on every now and then. You even forget that he came on before narrating when his voice suddenly pops up on screen and it's kind of jarring, but the narration itself doesn't even make sense. I don't think it was even necessary, and sometimes it's over-explanatory. I also think some of the side characters were more used as plot devices than anything else, namely Dan Stevens and Karen Gillan, who I love, but they really didn't make that much of an impact. I understand what they were trying to do with Dan Stevens specifically, but his role or his impact should have been much bigger. My biggest issue though is some pacing issues when it comes to certain character beats, namely in the second and third act. They either feel like they're too sudden or they feel like they're just too slow at panning out. And that costs the film some fluidity. The first act into the second flows tremendously well up until Harrison Ford comes in and he stays with Buck and they have their adventure together. But in between those parts of the film, there are certain moments that are quite jarring because they don't fit with the overall pacing of the narrative surrounding it. But despite those issues and this not being the most original story you're ever going to see, it's a well-done dog film with the dog as the actual main character, which was surprising to me. It's actually more of a children's film than I was expecting, and I don't mean that either as a positive or negative, just an observation. In fact, overall, what they were trying to do with this film and how they were trying to do it, I think it fits. And I found myself really enjoying the characters, their adventure, the story, and its themes. It actually gets on your emotions a couple of times, and I had a smile on my face throughout the entire film. The notion that it is CGI, it's bothersome at points, but on a technical aspect is really well done, and I found myself completely forgetting that it was CGI because I was so immersed in the character's story and the storytelling of Chris Sanders. I'm giving The Call of the Wild a B. Now, what did you think of The Call of the Wild, my beautiful geekies? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know, have you read the book? Did you like it? Let me know if you have seen any of the other versions of the adaptations of this classic novel. And thank you so much for watching once more. I'll be back soon with more reviews for Brahms, The Boy 2, and many others. Hope to see you there. And so until then, stay beautiful, stay geeky, and don't forget to subscribe and like, because it really helps me and the channel out. But most importantly, above everything else, forever and always, love each other and love the movies.